All right, so we're still dealing with fiscal policy. Basically, it's how government raises its money and how it's going to spend the money. Okay, the tools that government uses for fiscal policy is spending and taxes. Okay, that's why when I said how government raises its money, we're talking about taxes. That's one tool government can use. Then how to spend its money, we're talking about government expenditure. So we're still looking at these tutorial questions which I prepared. Yes. Let me just give you a run through of some of the questions we did earlier last time, but I didn't record. So the first question here was to define fiscal policy and explain the difference between expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. So I've already defined fiscal policy, okay, how government decides to spend money and raise that money, okay. Or you can say fiscal policy is how government uses taxes and spending to influence the economy. So now, expansionary fiscal policy, this is where government spends more and raises taxes. Okay. Some of the reasons why government would implement an expansionary fiscal policy, all right. One is to reduce unemployment, okay, because when government spends on infrastructure, health, defense, okay, people are getting jobs, okay, so the unemployment rate reduces, all right. Another reason why government can implement expansionary fiscal policy to stimulate economic growth in terms of growing the GDP, okay, because as government expands, okay, it can also help businesses expand, they also produce more, okay, and also as government is spending, okay, that's more money in people's pockets, okay. When people have more money in their pockets, they spend more, and when they spend more, that gives a signal to businesses to produce more, because if a business sees demand for its good is rising, all right, yes, it's going to increase the price, but also they would want to produce more. Okay. So as government spends, people are getting money. All right. That money, they're using it to buy various goods and services. As they buy various goods and services, businesses were going to see that the demand for their goods and services has gone up. So they'll be enticed to produce more. All right. Yes. And then another purpose of expansionary fiscal policy is to prevent deflation. Okay. Because deflation is bad for an economy. Okay, the consequences of deflation are very bad. So government wants to keep spending within the economy. People should keep on spending so that prices do not fall. Okay, because as prices fall, businesses now produce. Uh, as prices fall, people are going to, yes, they'll be happy at first to buy cheaper goods, all right. But on the business side, all right, when prices fall and they can't increase productivity, you find now the business is going to be at losses. What are they going to do? They're going to cut down workers. You have then high levels of unemployment, right? So deflation is not good for the economy. Okay. Any questions before I move further? Okay. Now, usually with expansionary fiscal policy, you will have demand pull inflation. Okay. Because as government spends and then people start earning more money and people are getting employed, there'll be more spending within the economy. And inflation occurs when there's too much money chasing little goods. That's when prices of goods goes up. Okay, so that's one thing government is should be aware of every time they implement fiscal policy. Demand pull inflation. Okay. Then we have contractionary fiscal policy, where government reduces spending. Oh, one more thing on expansionary fiscal policy. When government, because I said expansionary fiscal policy is when government increases spending or reduces taxes. Okay, so when government reduces taxes, it means more disposable income for businesses and people. Okay, and the more disposable income you have, the more spending that you do. Okay, that's on the taxes side. Yes, lowering taxes, more spend, more disposable income, more disposable income, more spending. Okay. You've got contractionary fiscal policy where government now cuts down spending or it raises taxes. Okay. So the reasons why government will implement a contractionary fiscal policy, it's number one to control demand for inflation. Okay, because the problem about inflation is the more people spend more, the more prices go up. Now, initially, when prices are going up and people are spending more, businesses will be influenced to produce more. But now the thing is, the businesses cannot keep on increasing production as demand goes up. They will reach a point where the production cannot keep up with demand. And what happens now? The only thing that can happen is now prices will just start going up, 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 and up, and you start reaching hyperinflation. So when the government notices the inflation rate has gone up, this is when they need to implement contractionary fiscal policy. They have to reduce the inflation rate because inflation has got, if it's left unchecked, it's got a lot of bad effects on an economy. All right. We've seen with the introduction of the new kwacha notes, all right, inflation has eroded the purchasing power of 100 kwacha. That's why now they brought in the 200 kwacha note and the 500 kwacha note. Okay, inflation erodes purchasing power of currency. Okay, and with inflation, the other problem is our goods become expensive to foreigners who buy Zambian goods. Okay, so you might find they start buying goods elsewhere, and our exports get affected. Okay, yes. Okay, the other reason is to prevent the economy from overheating. Okay, so basically, what we mean overheating is there's a lot of spending, GDP is growing at an excessive rate. Okay, now the problem about when an economy is like when we say it's overheating, it will reach a point where it will crash, and now you have a depression. Okay, you have a depression, a recession, or worse, depression. Just hold on for it. Yes, as I said, well, you do not want the economy to expand at a massive rate. Okay, because what happens is it will reach a point where the economy now will go down. You'll be in a depression or a recession, one of the two. Right. So government who has to reduce spending and increase taxes so that the economy doesn't overheat. Okay, and When the economy is overheating, you've also got high levels of inflation. And the other reason is to reduce the budget deficit. Okay. Um, the budget deficit, remember, when your expenses exceed your income, you're in a deficit. So you wouldn't want to spend more if you're in such a deficit, because in order to spend more, it means now you have to borrow more. And the more you borrow, the greater the deficit. All right. Because most of the time, this money government is spending is borrowed money. So if they spend more, it means they have to also borrow more. And if they borrow more, the higher the budget deficit. Meaning now getting a loan becomes a problem. Okay? Because the bigger your budget deficit, the risk of you defaulting on payments. Okay? You start defaulting on payments. All right. And then the other reasons to meet conditions set by international lenders or institutions, right? These these are the people who are giving your country money and probably you're owing them. So if they see you're spending more and you're owing them money, they're going to get now reluctant to give you more money because the credit is growing big. The Congole is going big. The more the government is spending, they said it needs to borrow more. So now if IMF is giving Zambia money, okay, and Zambia every year is just spending more, spending more, spending more, the IMF now will be reluctant to give Zambia more money because Zambia will be owing huge amounts of money and probably we might default. That's why we had to do the debt restructuring because Zambia was owing a lot. So Zambia had to go to its lenders and ask for some time to get things together so that we can repay the debt that we're owing. Okay, and you can imagine after we've done this debt restructuring deal, we accumulate more debt. Would that be a good thing, colleagues? We've discussed with our lenders, now give us a grace period. Let us get ourselves together so that we can raise money and pay you back. Now, in that process, there where you're trying to get yourself together, finding ways to raise money so that you can pay back these loans, you start accumulating more debt also on top of that. Yes, so it gets tricky like that. Any questions? Colleagues, one of you will be the Minister of Finance and you'll be in charge of determining how the country is going to spend its money and also raise its money. So these are the times to ask questions. Okay? These are the times to ask. Okay? Okay. Mm, here we're talking about the crowding out effect when government borrows money and leaves less money available for businesses and other people to borrow. And yeah, the government borrows money and it leaves less money to be borrowed to businesses and other people who need to borrow money. And the effect of that is those businesses and other people who need to borrow the money, they'll be charged high interest rates, Because government has taken most of the money out of the banks, leaving less money for businesses and other people to borrow. So that little money the banks have, when a business comes to borrow, they will be charged a high interest rate. Or when you go to borrow, you'll be charged a high interest rate. Why? Because government has borrowed a lot. So that's the crowding out effect. Okay. It- Government chases businesses. Okay. Especially like even like foreign businesses that would have wanted to have invested here in Zambia. Government removes all the money, or not all the money, most of the money from the banks. You as a business, you go to the bank who need to borrow money, want to invest. You find now you're being charged an excessive interest rate, a high interest rate. Okay, that's the crowding out effect. Any questions, colleagues? Mr. Mpasa, any questions on the crowding out effect? Mr. Simon, Madam Tandira? Yes, so crowding out effect, government removes most of the money. So there's little money for businesses and people to borrow, and those businesses and people will be charged high interest rates. Okay, so it will chase um, investment. Okay, and it's not good for an economy. Okay, because there are businesses that want to invest big here in Zambia. When they invest big, people are going to get jobs, unemployment levels will go down. All right, if that business will be producing, that production will contribute to our GDP. Now, if they find the banks are charging high interest rates, we miss those opportunities. Okay, and it also depends also how government, after they removed most of that money, how they also utilize it also is an important fact. Because if they utilize it in a bad way, then the economy is doomed. It's better if government has removed most money, that money has to be used well and efficiently, where the economy will benefit. Otherwise, that money is mismanaged, then we're losing out on many areas. Okay, we've got the next question was on the debt to GDP ratio. Okay, the debt to GDP ratio basically it's like asking with the money you get from your GDP, can you pay off your debt? Okay, you remember the GDP, total market value of the goods and services produced within a nation. Okay, so that value, can it be used to pay off the debt? Okay, or how much of the debt can be paid off? Okay, so this is the formula: debt to GDP ratio, public debt divided by GDP. Public debt, this is how much government is owing, both locally and internationally. Okay, so here's an example to illustrate this again. Okay, if let's say the Zambian government has debt of 10 million and the GDP is 5 million. Okay, so you divide 10 million divided by 5 million, that gives you 2. So there are many ways we can interpret this same 2 we've arrived here. Okay, one way we can interpret it, we can say the debt is twice the GDP. Okay. How much we're owing is twice more than how much we make when we produce goods and services. Okay. Another way we can interpret this is for every one kwacha the country earns from production, it owes 2 kwacha in debt. Okay. So if you produce a one good and you earn a 1 kwacha, with that 1 kwacha, you've got 2 kwacha that you're owing. So it means that 1 kwacha you can't pay off your full debt. Okay, you can only pay half of your debt. Okay. So a high debt to GDP ratio is not good because it means you are owing more. You're owing more than the value of what you produce. Okay. You want values at least 0 point something. Any values above 1, just know the debt is more than the GDP. Okay. Any value above 1, the debt is more than the GDP. And any value below 1, okay, it means your GDP is greater than your debt, meaning you can pay off all your debt with your GDP. With what you produce, you sell, and you can pay off all your debt and remain with some change. So here's an example of a low GDP debt to GDP ratio. All right. Let's say you have debt of 1 million and your GDP is 5 million. All right. So debt to GDP ratio 1 million divided by 5 million, that is 0.2. And as I told you, any value below 1, it means your GDP is greater than your debt. So one way we can interpret this is for every 1 kwacha of GDP, we're owing 20 ingwe in debt. Okay. So it means when you get that 1 kwacha, you can pay off your debt and you have some change. Any questions before we apply this now to fiscal policy? Okay, so if you've got a high debt to GDP ratio, it's paramount you implement contractionary fiscal policy because it means your debt is exceeding your GDP and you cannot pay all of it with your GDP. So if you implement an expansionary fiscal policy, it means that debt is going to even grow higher. Okay, that debt is going to grow high. Okay, so if you've got high debt, if the country has high debt to GDP ratio, it would be in the best interest to implement contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, it's not always the case because a lot of countries, if you look at their debt to GDP ratios, you're going to see values above 1. Okay, you see values above 1, but you see that's still spending. Okay, but theoretically, yeah, if your debt to GDP ratio is high, use contractionary fiscal policy. If your debt to GDP ratio is low, like in this case where we had a debt to GDP ratio of 0.2, okay, where our debt is just forming 20% of our GDP, that's another way to look at it. Okay, your debt is just 20% of your GDP. Okay, here for this previous example, our debt was 200% of our GDP. Yes, so when you've got a low debt to GDP ratio, it means you can use expansionary fiscal policy. Okay. it's you're in safe grounds. Okay, because you're likely to pay your debt. You're able to pay off all your debt. Okay. Yes. So I'll need you to check countries' debt to GDP ratios. I want you to see if you can find any country that has a debt to GDP ratio which is in the below one. Okay. Any questions? Any questions, queries before we go to the next one? The automatic stabilizers in fiscal policy. Okay, so these automatic stabilizers in fiscal policy, what we mean is basically government doesn't need to take any action should the conditions of the economy change. Okay, government doesn't need to take any actions. They'll just let these just work automatically. All right. So I'm going to give you some examples of these automatic stabilizers. You've got income taxes. Okay, if the economy is doing well, people are earning a lot of money, it means they'll be enticed to spend more. Okay. Now, when they spend more, you're going to have inflation, and then as you have inflation, as you spend more, prices go up and up and up and everything like that. So, when people earn more, these taxes also become higher for these people. Okay. So, with these higher taxes, it's going to at least people will still spend, but they won't spend as much as they could if there were no the taxes were not there. Okay. So in short, government is preventing people from overspending. This automatic stabilizer is preventing people from overspending when the economy is doing well. Okay, because as people earn more money, they'll have to pay more taxes. And the more taxes they pay, they're not going to spend as much as they can. They'll still spend, but it won't be that much. Therefore, you prevent high levels of inflation. Any questions on that? Okay. And if the economy is doing bad, all right, these taxes will be less, which will give they'll still have some money to spend, okay, so that they keep the economy going. Because as I said, what keeps an economy going is the spending within that economy. So when an economy is doing bad, you have to get the spending back up. All right. So if the economy is doing bad, people earn less, they'll pay less of these taxes. So they can still spend, right? So that there's still money going through in the economy. Then another stabilizer, unemployment benefits. Okay. If the economy is doing bad, people lose their jobs, they can have these unemployment benefits where they can have some money that they can use to at least stay afloat. Okay. So these unemployment benefits when economy is in a recession, okay, people have lost jobs, they can earn these unemployment benefits where they still have money coming in. Might not as be as it won't be as much as they were receiving as their salaries, but there's at least money that's coming in to at least keep them afloat so that they can still spend. Okay. Because the worst case is people get unemployed and they have no money. Okay. When that becomes now countrywide, now that's where you start seeing people are spending less because they don't have money. So prices now have to start eventually start dropping now. Okay. And now that becomes a problem for the businesses now. Because as prices drop, they have still got high costs to maintain. So now businesses now, due to dropping prices, they start laying off workers. That's how deflation is very bad for an economy. That's how it usually starts. People having no money. Majority of people having no money because the economy is bad. They've been laid off. They don't have money, so they can't spend. They can't spend. No one is buying goods and services. Well, they're buying less. And now to businesses, these are losses because you find you're producing goods that are just sitting in the shops there. So you might, as a business now, you might need to lower your production. Okay. And when you lower your production, you lay off more workers. And that cycle brings the deflation and now the economy is in a problem. Okay. So that's how unemployment benefits work. Okay. If the economy is doing well, no need for any unemployment benefits. Okay. But okay, if there are still people who get unemployed and everything, they are still going to need these unemployment benefits. Okay. Yes. Any questions on these automatic stabilizers? So what you should be asking yourself is how effective are Zambia's automatic fiscal stabilizers? How effective are they? Okay. I'll send you these notes for more stabilizers, but you can see income taxes, corporate taxes, sales taxes, and employment benefits. I'll send you these notes to read. Okay. Differentiate between discretionary fiscal policy and automatic fiscal policy. So, discretionary fiscal policy, this is where government has to make decisions. Has to make decisions, and these decisions are on spending and taxes. Okay, where they need to now implement new laws, new taxes, okay, change certain spending habits. Yeah, so basically, discretionary fiscal policy, government has to decide and make a move. Okay, but automatic fiscal policy, government doesn't have to do anything. The automatic stabilizers will come into play. Okay. There are automatic stabilizers that come into play. Okay, as we said with the taxes. Okay, if the economy is doing well, Means people have got more disposable income. Okay, others their income has even increased. Okay, so now to prevent them from spending too much, their taxes are also going to increase. Okay, their taxes will increase. So that increment in taxes is going to at least lower that spending, the potential spending that person could have done, right? Thus, slowing down the demand pull inflation. Okay. Yes. Any questions on that? Okay. Explain how government spending influences aggregate demand. Remember, aggregate demand here we just mean overall spending within the economy. Okay. So when government hires new teachers, these teachers start earning salaries. When they earn salaries, now they can buy certain goods and pay for certain services. Okay. So as they're paying for these goods and services, as they are spending on these goods and services, that's what we're saying the aggregate demand is now increasing. Okay. Have we got that, colleagues? Government spends, let's say for example, it hires nurses, defense personnel, teachers, right? All of those people are going to earn salaries. When they earn their salaries, they can now buy goods and services, assuming that they never had any money before. Now they have money, so they can pay for goods and certain services. So as they are spending on these goods and services, aggregate demand within the economy is growing. And this is where we say the demand pull inflation is happening. Are we okay with that? Any questions? Okay, so what I've just illustrated to you is the multiplier effect. Government spends, then overall spending in the economy increases. All right, that same example I gave to you, government spends, hires nurses, defense personnel, teachers, immigration. All those people start earning salaries. With their salaries, what will they do? They will be spending. So now overall spending in the economy grows. All right. So that's what we call the multiplier effect. Okay. The same way you have seen on, like if you're near a pond, then you throw a stone in that pond, you see those waves like a ripple effect of the waves. That's how this spending multiplier is. Okay. Government throws the stone in the pond, and now the waves mean that means money is being spread in the economy. People are getting money, and now they are spending more. Okay, that is the multiplier effect. Any questions on that? Multiplier effect. How government spending affects overall spending within the economy. Okay. That is the multiplier effect. Before, let me just get some bundles. My bundles about to finish. Let me just get some bundles. But do you have any questions? Yes, any questions, colleagues? That's the multiplier effect. Okay. How government spending affects overall spending within the economy. Right? Or another way to think about it is how total spending in an economy is affected by changes in government spending. Okay. How total spending in an economy is affected by changes in government spending. Okay, multiplier effect. Okay, and this always happens, all right? When government spends, just know it's more money in other people's pockets, and those people are going to spend, all right? Then we've got this final question, which is what is the spending multiplier and the balanced budget multiplier? Right. So the spending multiplier is spending multiplier tells us how much government spending, how much overall spending will increase when government spends. Okay. So basically, let's say for example, if we have a spending multiplier of 4, okay, and then government spends, let's say, 100 million, okay. So government spends 100 million, so it will multiply by 4. 100 million times 4, 400 million. Okay, so the total spending within the economy will be 400 million. Okay, government starts by spending 1 million, then through the multiplier effect, the total spending within the economy was going to be 4 million. Okay, then the balanced budget multiplier, okay, it's just saying as if government increases spending and also increases taxes by the same amount, overall spending within the economy will still increase. All right. Balanced budget multiplier tells us that if government increases spending and raises taxes by the same amount, total expenditure or output will still increase. Okay. So if government increases spending and taxes rise, okay, even though the taxes rise, all right, still more people are still going to need to spend. They will still be spending overall. Okay, taxes won't make people stop spending. That's what it's trying to say in simple terms. Okay, government increases spending, it also increases taxes by the same amount. Okay, what we're going to see overall total expenditure or total output will increase. So these multipliers, we're going to see them in the calculation questions so that we interpret them easily and properly. All right, we're going to see in the calculation questions.